Hello there. Welcome to the second day of Squatchmas. Are you ready? I know you are. Let's go. You can call me Tom from Kentucky. Lots of folks in my small town know our place by the front yard nativity we put out every year under the big elm tree. My sighting of a Bigfoot happened because of that nativity. We live at the last proper block on the east side of town before the lots start getting bigger and bigger and you find yourself in the real country. Beyond us is a large yard, then a ribbon of a creek, then a line of second-growth woods. On our side, it's a line of small houses, mostly ranches and Cape Cods. Everyone on our end is a bit older. There are no kids or teenagers running about. The nativity is really my wife's thing. My job is to make sure it's something she stays proud of. We built the stable years ago from fence boards and a sheet of plywood with a slot cut at the peak so it sheds water. The figures are very old plastic, the kind you hose off every spring and repaint or touch up every couple of years. We wedge an extra straw bale behind the manger, and there are 2 more straw bales stacked behind the stable to give it more balance. We stake and zip tie everything down. The figures, the manger, the stable, all of it. But I have learned through the years, those straw bales add more stability in a fierce Kentucky winter wind than just zip ties alone. There's also 2 spotlights out there on sticks to give it that Christmas pageant glow. It was the week before Christmas, about 9 p.m. The forecast had freezing rain moving in just around midnight. And around here, that means your car doors and anything else that moves will be ice shut. I told my wife, I'm going to go bring the wise men and the camel in so they don't blow and break. I was worried about them because the wise men and the camel are outside the stable itself. They catch all the wind, rain, snow, and ice. They get no protection. And I worry because they're old, and they have little tiny cracks in the plastic that might expand if ice gets deep into them, and I was worried they would split apart. My wife said she'd finish loading the dishwasher and she'd meet me out there to help. Our dog, he's a 70-pound mutt with more bark than bite, stood at the back door and wagged exactly once, like he wanted to go outside. Then he suddenly decided that he was urgently needed by the wood stove. That should have told me something. Everything outside already had a thin, silvery, crusty frost to it. It was the kind that you hear when your boots hit it, a tiny crackle crunching sound. I stepped out the kitchen side door and down the 1 step to the carport that was attached to the side of the house. Other than the spotlights on the nativity, the night was dark outside. I walked between the side of the house and my parked truck, coming to the front of the carport. From here, I had a perfect view of the back side of the manger and the lit nativity pieces on the front lawn. I saw the manger, and I stopped dead in my tracks. There was something dark behind the manger. It wasn't there just a couple minutes ago when I looked out the kitchen window over the sink as I was talking to my wife. That was right before I came out. My first instinct was to back up. We do have bear that come out of the Daniel Boone National Forest every now and then. It's not often, but it's enough you know to stay alert. And that was the first thought that I had. But that was thrown out as soon as my eyes took in what I was looking at. This wasn't some dark, shapeless blob. It had a shape, and it wasn't shaped anything like a bear. There was a clear head, shoulders with arms and hands, and after a half-second, I made out legs that had the body down low, like it was in a crouched or kneeling position. There were no ears sticking out from the head that I saw, and no snout like a bear. And the size of everything I was seeing was more than just wrong. It didn't seem possible. I saw the massive hands feeling and digging around through the straw bale. It was intent on doing whatever it was doing, and it hadn't noticed me yet. I knew this wasn't some casual animal like a bear, But I wasn't convinced that it wasn't a person, even if the size was impossible. I was thinking, who in the world would come out on a night like this to fiddle around with some straw? I remember blinking my eyes, thinking I had to be seeing this wrong. There had to be two people out there. Maybe they were both wearing big coats. They were crouched down together. And somehow to me, they looked like one big thing, not two individuals. I also wanted a little bit of a better look. I took one step forward, causing a small patch of ice that had crept under the edge of the carport to crackle and crunch. The crouched figure cocked its head toward me quickly. It wasn't a full turn, but it did hear me, no doubt. While the head cocked, the entire body began to rise up to a standing straight position. It was like watching someone with a marionette pull all the strings upward. It was a fluid motion as this creature rose to a standing position. And then I knew. It was something that I had heard people whisper about, joke about, and talk about. It was something I'd never given any real thought to. Bigfoot, a wood booger. Nothing else fit. It matched all the descriptions I've ever heard. I've spent my entire life in the southern Kentucky area. I thought I had seen everything that roams these parts. Well, I had seen enough to know this wasn't any of the other things I had ever seen. But I somehow knew what it was. I cannot stress enough the size of this Bigfoot that stood before me. I built that stable, so I knew the dimensions, and this being dwarfed it. I put its height at just over 7 feet, and over 3 feet wide at the shoulders. It didn't block out all of the stable, but probably about 75% of it. And my stable's dimensions are roughly 5 feet wide and just over 6 feet tall. I saw the slope of the head, the short hair looking thick on the skull, the pattern of it as it parted into a natural line down the middle of the domed skull, all of it highlighted by the ambient glow of the spotlights. The face was now turned, not just the head, but the shoulders and all of it. It was turned to face me. In the spotlight wash, I caught texture. Hair shorter around the cheeks, a heavy, bony-looking brow that stuck out over the eyes, a nose that looked flatter across the bridge than ours, but had large, round nostrils in it. I really wasn't in any doubt before of the thing that stood in front of me, but if I had been, this took care of that. Without meaning to, I muttered something to myself like, "Oh boy," or something, but it heard me. It didn't flinch, but it clearly heard me. It cocked its head again, like it was listening closely. Then it did something to me that, well, all I can say, seemed very human-like. It shifted a half step to the left, using part of the stable wall and its shoulder to cut the glare from the spotlights so it could look at me without squinting. I know that sounds like I'm giving it too much credit, but I watched it lean that shoulder into the shadow, and it made total sense. It was like a fisherman easing away from the reflection to see deeper into a pond or a lake. Then I did what my wife says I always do in an argument when I realize I'm not going to win this one. I retreated to the kitchen. I stepped backwards, retracing my steps along the house and the carport, feeling my way in the darkness with my arms behind me as I moved. When I felt the kitchen door, I opened it without ever taking my eyes off the Bigfoot that was still clearly visible in the lights out front, and I could see the Bigfoot was watching me too. The screen door gave its little spring squeak as I opened it. I backed inside to the kitchen and closed the door. I shut off the kitchen light. My wife, Laurel, who was standing at the dishwasher, let out a little yelp. She was still trying to load the dishwasher, and I made the kitchen dark. I quickly quieted her and went over and turned her head with my hands to look at the scene outside, which was lit up and clear to see from the window over the sink. She grew up here too, but she's heard stories just like I had. We stood there for maybe 2 or 3 seconds in stunned silence. The Bigfoot outside was watching us, and I had the idea that he could see us even with the light inside the kitchen turned out. The Bigfoot out there took 3 steps, clear and measured. It came even with the front of the stable, and the spotlight took it full on for a second. That's when I saw detail that I will never forget. The hair on the forearms laid down in smooth lines. It wasn't matted or dirty. The hands looked wide with the kind of thick fingers that come from hard use. And the chest didn't have a single hard body line to it, but it was square, dense, and solid. If you've ever seen an old man who spent his whole life throwing hay bales around like they were 5-pound bags of flour, you've seen a chest like that before. Solid. Now, people always ask me about the eyes. I don't know why, but the spotlight was low and it was off to the side, not straight on. So I didn't have a chance to see if I got any eye shine reflection like people always ask me about. All I could see was a set of eyes that were set deep under that bony ridge of a brow. Strangely, my eye focused on a really weird detail. Bits of straw that were clinging to pieces of hair on the arm, and a few pieces that were stuck to the leg. Straw is the rural equivalent of a craft room's glitter. It gets everywhere, sticks to everything. You can clean it, and every time you think you've got it all cleaned up, well, you have to think again, because there's more of it. It's a strange thing that I remember seeing, but I do. It continued that steady gaze for another second or 2. Then it turned, leaned down, and lifted up that straw bale with one hand. Then it looked right at us in the window again, and purposefully walked off. Big as you please, it just walked right off. Now, let me tell you something about hay bales if you've never worked with them. They are heavy. Now, they vary in weight. Now, the ones I buy are averaging 55 to 60 pounds, and they're baled with a thick plastic strap that will bite into your hands and fingers like razor blades if you aren't wearing thick gloves. And even the strongest guys I know that do sling those bales around like they're nothing, they use 2 hands to do it. But that Bigfoot just picked it up like it was picking up a bag of groceries and walked off. It wasn't in any hurry either. It crossed the lawn, then crossed our drive, then went down the side of our yard where there's that natural ditch that runs in a diagonal from the woods all the way down to the creek. Now, before it got to the ditch, it was lost in the darkness, and I couldn't see it anymore, but I knew where it was going. There was nowhere else nearby it could possibly have taken refuge. Laurel and I looked at each other wide-eyed in the semi-darkness of the kitchen. I recall we mumbled to each other some things like, "Holy cow, can you believe it? Was that a Bigfoot? You saw it too, right?" We were saying things like that. But here's the really funny thing. We were whispering. We were whispering in our own kitchen like we were afraid it was going to hear us. It's kind of funny, but it's like we weren't supposed to speak out in the darkness or something. After a couple of minutes, sanity returned to us, and we shut off the spotlights to the Nativity from inside. I thought about going out there and at least staking down a tarp over the wise men and their camel, but I didn't. I tried to sleep, but I had a very restless night. I confess, I did get up a couple times, and I went to the kitchen, and I looked back out that window. It wasn't there, of course, and I told myself I was checking that the stable and the figurines were okay in the ice storm. But I knew that was a lie. Now, it's true, the ice was coming down hard and the winds were blowing something terrible. But some plastic figures in the yard isn't really what got me out of my warm bed on a very cold night several times. The next morning, everything outside was sparkling like it had been dipped in glue and rolled in silver glitter. If you've never seen the aftermath of a true heavy ice storm, well, you're missing something beautiful. True enough, those storms are dangerous and deadly. But the next day, when the sun comes out, oh my goodness, it's breathtaking. Everything shines and shimmers. I had my coffee, then suited up, and I went out to check for damage and to see if last night's visitor left any evidence. And he did. The tracks were perfect. From the back of the stable where the kneeling had occurred, out past the drive and down into the ditch and then disappearing into the woods. Well, you could follow every step clean as a book line. The ice had formed sometime after the Bigfoot left, so the depressions wore a thin glaze that made a low rim of light on each one when the sun hit them. Here and there, small bits of straw marked the trail along the way under the ice, like Hansel and Gretel had dropped their breadcrumbs. The kneeling marks behind the stable were very clear. The right knee had sunk into the lawn through the thin layer of frost and made a large rounded oval, longer than my open hand. Beside it, a toed foot angled under, like it had tucked that foot while it leaned in when it was feeling around in the straw. From there, the prints started. In the thin glaze of frost, you don't get toes like in wet creek sand, but you get pressure shapes. These ran long, the heel bowl distinct, the forepart broad with a forward oval where toes would have been. I put a tape to the one in the shadow of the stable, and I got a flat 14 inches, heel to the furthest forward pressure line. Across the forepart, just over 6 inches. I measured the stride, 63 inches, then 64, then a longer one at 73 inches across the drive where the slope added momentum like it had done a half jump. We did not follow those tracks. We saw what we could see as we stood near the stable in our front yard, and what we could see as we walked in the open area across the yard. But beyond the drainage ditch, under the leafless trees and into the thickness of the white pines, it was dark and unwelcoming. What we could see from there was good enough for us. Now, what comes next is usually in the comments section about people that don't believe. The charity suggestions that they give, that it was a neighbor in a kid's suit, some bear, or a trick of light. You go right on ahead and you tell me all the things you think it was other than a Bigfoot. But I know my neighbors. I know bears, and we don't have them real heavy here. And even the ones we do get, black bears aren't all that big, most of them. And I know the difference between cloth and hair in a yard light. If somebody wants to dress in a hirsute and kneel in my lawn just to steal a straw bale, then fake some 16-inch prints across a frosty yard on a frigid night with a severe ice storm due to start at any minute, well, all right then. I want to shake that man's hand, because he's one heck of a man to not only think of it, but to do it and pull it off flawlessly. And all of that for a bale of straw. Officially, we did not call anyone. Not because I'm worried or that we wouldn't be taken seriously. Actually, it was sort of the opposite. Maybe the officials might not take us very seriously, but I knew a few of my neighbors probably would. And the last thing I needed was Cliff from a few houses down stalking around at night with a rifle, dead set on protecting baby Jesus. And he's the type that would, too. I did tell the neighbor right across the road from us, Sharon, because she has one of those Ring cameras pointed right at her driveway, and it's right across from ours, and I thought maybe we could get a silhouette moving across the yard or something. I know that her Ring camera can see that far sometimes because sometimes she'll send us videos of deer standing in our front yard. I was really hoping. But when she pulled up her Ring account, she said the internet went spotty exactly when the ice started, and her hub recorded nothing from 8:59 to 9:21 p.m. I suppose the bulk of my story is done, but there are 3 small postscripts that I want to add, and then I'll be done. First, my mother-in-law stopped by on Christmas Eve with some fudge wrapped in wax paper for us. She stood there in the front yard, looked at the Nativity, and she said, "Well, you sure didn't put out as much straw this year." I shrugged and said, "Well, we did, but some of it disappeared during the storm." And I left it at that. She shook her head like, "Well, ain't that a shame," and let it go. Second, the other bale of straw disappeared one night, not too long after. But it wasn't a night that showed any tracks for us. There was no snow, and the ground was just frozen solid. It was just a few days after Christmas that time, so we just packed the stable up early that year and called it quits. Third, the first week of January, a neighbor of mine stopped by and let us know that he'd be hunting those woods behind us. We don't own those woods, but he had permission from the guy who does own them. And he always stops by to let us know as a courtesy in case we hear gunshots or anything out there. But the next time I saw him, he asked me if I knew who had taken all my straw. I looked at him funny and I said, "No, I didn't. Why?" He just looked at me and said that he found a large scooped out area behind and under some of those pines with a lot of straw. Looked like some animal had been bedding down in there. I had had suspicions all along that using the straw as nesting material had been the goal all along for the Bigfoot. Why else take it? But that leaves another question to ponder. How did it know to go for the straw? I mean, I reckon it's learned at some point that straw is good insulation and it doesn't hold moisture. And I guess it took that first bale and then came back for the second when it decided it needed more. To my knowledge, there hasn't been any more Bigfoot activity in this area. Now, that doesn't mean that there's been some activity, and whoever witnessed it, if they did, are like me, and they're just not spreading the information all around town. But somehow I kind of think this Bigfoot was passing through, maybe got caught up in this storm and bedded down for a while, and then moved on when it could. But how did it know the ice storm was coming that night? I mean, we knew, but the ice had not started right then, not yet. The dramatic temperature drop that would come overnight with deep wind chills, that hadn't started yet either. Or would it have used the straw on any cold night? It makes me wonder. Well, that's my whole story. I will be watching my nativity carefully this year. I put some extra bales of straw out, and I put cameras on the nativity from 3 different angles. If I get anything, I will be pounding down your email box. If you do read this for Squatchmas, tell folks Merry Christmas from a Southern Kentucky boy and that the wise men made it back out this year on Thanksgiving weekend. And baby Jesus is safe and sound out there, I promise. Merry Squatchmas to you all. Love, Tom and Laurel. Well, my Sasquad, that brings us to the close of the second day of Squatchmas for 2025. Now be sure to tune in tomorrow night, 7 p.m. Eastern Time, for Day 3 of Squatchmas. And don't forget, you can always take Buckeye Bigfoot along with you while you're out looking at Christmas lights by downloading our podcast version. Or if you're sitting at home wrapping some gifts, just say, "Alexa, play the latest from Buckeye Bigfoot." All right, my Sasquad, until we meet up again, leave your porch light on and bake a few extra cookies for Bigfoot. And always remember, absence of proof is not proof of absence. Thanks for listening.